The liberation of Coruscant 6 years after the Battle of Yavin may have been a symbol of the New Republic's dominant position as the legitimate galactic government, but any celebration was short-lived. Leading up to her escape from the planet, Intelligence Director Isard of the Empire had begun the deployment of a bioweapon across Coruscant. This was in the form of a virus developed by General Avir Derrico following the success of his bioweapons lab on the planet Borleus, the fate of which we covered in prior videos in the series leading to Coruscant's capture. Specifically engineered to target non-humans without being able to mutate and infect humans, the Krytos Virus, which was best stored and spread in Coruscant water reservoirs and ice caps, quickly infected millions of non-humans. This had the joint intended effects of making Coruscant turn from a symbol of victory to being a costly burden, while also fostering further feelings of suspicion among aliens towards humans, building on resentments left over from the Empire's rule and earlier. Knowing that the New Republic would need as much Bacta as they could get their hands on, Bacta being a medical substance able to treat a variety of issues, Isard took her now free flagship, the Executor class Lucenkia, and established herself at the head of the planet Thyferra's government, in an alliance with the Zukfra Corporation, one of two Bacta conglomerates on the planet. Zukfra was primarily human-controlled and did not look kindly upon the insectoid Vratics who originally inhabited the planet and had invented Bacta. The rival company to Zukfra, called Zaltan, was friendlier to both the Vratics and the Rebel Alliance, though it was still human-controlled, and was outlawed after Isard's takeover. The New Republic, realizing their resources were being stretched thin with enemies on multiple fronts, found themselves with a dilemma. While Isard had forcibly taken over Thyferra and was holding the galaxy's Bacta supply hostage, her military power had greatly diminished since losing Coruscant, and other warlords provided more direct military threat which couldn't be ignored. Warlord Zsinj in particular had made several aggressive moves towards the New Republic, which we covered in the Road to Coruscant video, and his territory extended perilously deep into the core. With the decision that Zsinj was the bigger threat, and the very flimsy premise that Isard's takeover was largely legitimate and internal corporate politics, Thyferra was seemingly going to be left to its own devices. Rogue Squadron, who had played a key role in liberating Coruscant, was unwilling to allow that to happen. The squadron members all resigned their commissions in the New Republic's military and began a guerrilla campaign against Isard's forces returning to their rebel roots. The Bacta cartel companies, Zukfra and Zaltan, each originally had a representative in Rogue Squadron as well. Bror Jace, the Zaltan representative, was lured home by a message that the patriarch of their family was dying and was seemingly killed en route to visit his family, only to reveal later that it had been a ruse to hide him as he connected with a Vratics rebel group, the Ashern, operating on Thyferra. Orissi Delaret, the Zukfra representative, had actually been a spy within Rogue Squadron feeding information to the Empire, and sided with Isard in the battle for Thyferra, which came to be known as the Bacta War. The Rogues' mission didn't always work at cross purposes with the New Republic's goals, however. In one of their attempts to secure some Bacta to distribute to planets in need, the Rogues raided a base belonging to Warlord Zsinj at Yagdol, which is incredibly far from Zinj's territory, but that's a separate issue. Pash Kraken, longtime ally of the Rogues, then led a strike force against the base as part of an official New Republic operation, and then the official paperwork after that reflected that the base had been destroyed. In reality, Kraken had turned it over to Wedge Antilles and Rogue Squadron's command to use it as a base of operations for their part in the Bacta War. Kraken had originally wanted to defect with them to fight against Isard, but considering Kraken's father was the director of New Republic intelligence, it was determined that no one would believe that it was a legitimate defection from the New Republic. Aid from the New Republic would come in other forms as well, though they couldn't officially sanction the Rogues' actions. When they reconstituted a new Rogue Squadron to replace Wedge's pilots, they put the original squad's X-Wings up for sale as in need of repairs and new PL-1s, also known as just missing pilots. Using funding from Tycho Selchu and the Zaltan Corporation, among other allies, they were all able to buy their original X-Wings along with other supplies. On top of the Zaltan and Ashern allies who we mentioned earlier, as well as aid from smugglers like Booster Tarek, the Rogues were joined by a squadron of Twi'lek fighters called Sherdakis, a combination of X-Wing and TIE fighter parts, led by the Twi'lek warrior Taldira, whose loyalty Wedge had won on the Twi'lek home planet of Ryloth in single combat during their earlier attempts to secure a form of spice called Rilkor, as part of a New Republic experiment to treat the virus by combining Bacta and Rilkor. As the rogues and their allies built up their forces preparing to expel Isard from Thyferra, they engaged in several raids against Xû'xfra's Bacta convoys, beginning with one at Corax. They would then take the contents of these convoys and distribute them to planets where there was a shortage. One such planet was Halonet, but after accepting Bacta from Rogue Squadron, Isard sent Captain 8 Convarian and the Victory Star Destroyer Corruptor to bombard the planet, entirely wiping out the colony there. This prompted a change in strategy from the rogues, hoping to spare other planets from fear of further reprisals. They transitioned from targeting the convoys themselves to hitting a production facility belonging to Xû'xfra on Kretsu 5, slowing production and trading the stolen Bacta to merchants in exchange for arms and munitions, believing Isard then wouldn't risk pushing away the traders by targeting those merchants herself. Rogue Squadron would soon get a chance to avenge Halonet by destroying the Corruptor. To whittle down the Thyferran defense forces filling up Isard's fighter corps, Rogue Squadron returned to their raids on convoys. Rather than taking the Bacta, they would hit the convoy, wait for a Star Destroyer to show up and launch fighters, then only stay long enough to take out a few ties before leaving again, costing Isard in time, money, and personnel, while also hurting Xû'xfra's reputation. Isard learned of the rogues' rendezvous point in the Alderaan system, now called the Graveyard, where they were taking a delivery of parts and munitions from smuggler allies. She borrowed an Interdictor-class cruiser, the Aggregator, from Warlord Trayton Teradok of the Greater Maldrude, who we'll get into greater detail with in future campaigns. Aggregator and Corruptor were deployed to Alderaan to ambush the rogues and their shipment. The rogues employed a new strategy where they were able to coordinate the proton torpedo salvos from all of their X-Wings, using the computer of just one X-Wing, and linked them up much more efficiently that way. These torpedoes from the X-Wings in Cherdaki were able to weaken the shields on one flank of the Corruptor, which then turned its other side towards them for protection. While the weak side was turned away, a mysterious frigate began attacking the weakened ship, opening an opportunity for Wedge to destroy the bridge, taking out the ship entirely. This frigate turned out to be an old automated Alderanian Thronta-class warcruiser, the Valiant, and was responding to Tycho's fighter using the IFF code of another Alderanian ship it had been intended to escort, called Another Chance. As the rebel forces turned their attention to the Aggregator, it fled, leaving behind all starfighters and escape pods from the Corruptor. Valiant, still thinking Tycho was an Alderanian war frigate it was meant to protect, joined the rogues' forces and was placed under the command of Celestian pilot Errol Numb. Unfortunately, there's no official depictions for the Valiant, and we don't have a design for Empire War Expanded where I use the models from for these videos, so just assume it's off-screen in the render. The destruction of the Corruptor left Isard with just Lusankya and two Imperial-class Star Destroyers named Avarice and Virulence for her main fleet. The captain of Avarice, Sarionka, had long held reservations about the direction of both the Empire in general and Isard in particular. Her use of Krytos on Coruscant and the annihilation of Halonet had only pushed him further down that path. While he was engaging in an affair with the wife of a Moff at a cottage on the planet El Chandru-Pika, Wedge Antilles was able to corner him and talk to Yonka, bribing him to first go into hiding and then help the rogues at Thyferra, to which Yonka agreed. Alongside operations on the ground at Thyferra itself, the final steps of the Bacta War involved preparing for taking on the massive Lusankya. They'd planned to take advantage of the targeting telemetry trick they had employed at the Graveyard in two ways. For one, they would begin strapping missile launchers to a giant fleet of freighters to use directly against Lusankya. With these missiles coordinated by one ship or fewer computers, they wouldn't need all the targeting computers installed on those ships, so instead, those were installed on their Empress-class starbase at Yagdol. The final battles first began with leaking the location of that base to Isard's forces. Captain Joach Dryso, the senior officer aboard the Lusankya, took both of the remaining Star Destroyers to Yagdol, intending to destroy the rogues once and for all. When they arrived, smuggler Booster Tarek, in command of the base defenses, engaged many powerful tractor beams on the Lusankya, locking it in place and locking what seemed to be hundreds of missiles and torpedo launchers onto the massive ship. Captain Varsha of the Virulence decided to sacrifice her own ship to allow Lusankya to escape, flying between the station and Lusankya. When Pashkraken's A-Wing squadron arrived, Dryso was convinced that a New Republic strike force was coming to destroy his flagship, and with Virulence having locked itself into place instead of Lusankya, he fled back to Thyferra. The Virulence, on the other hand, remained stuck and was surrendered to Tarek. Dryso arrived back at Thyferra already planning how to justify his flight from Yagdol, having abandoned not just the Virulence but all of his own fighters in the system. Alongside Lusankya though, Seryonka's rechristened ISD, now named Freedom, Valiant, Rogue Squadron, and the hundreds of missile-laden freighters had jumped into the system, and Rogue had begun engaging the undertrained starfighter forces remaining there, led by the defector Oseritzel. Freedom engaged the Lusankya at close range to limit the latter's advantage in sheer size and firepower, while the freighters pummeled it from afar. Meanwhile on the ground, Rogue ally and future wife of Wedge Antilles, Yala Waseri, was leading ground operations to infiltrate Zukfra's headquarters and find Isard. Over the course of the battle, Isard seemingly managed to escape on a shuttle. Believing the battle would soon be lost, she ordered Dryso to cover her retreat and then retreat himself. Dryso refused to leave. Freedom was now heavily damaged and the freighters were basically out of missiles. While Lusankya itself was also heavily damaged, he believed he could win the battle and take Isard's position as ruler of Thyferra. Virulence suddenly arrived from hyperspace and he believed he had finally secured his victory, but it had actually been taken under the command of Booster Tarek, who used it to transport Pash Kraken's A-Wings to the battle as well. With the assault on his flagship redoubled, Dryso threatened to ram the ship into Thyferra. Not wanting to throw his and the rest of the crew's lives away in a petty act of self-destruction, Lieutenant Warone of the Lusankya shot Dryso and took command, surrendering the ship to Wedge's forces and ending the Bacta war. Isard's transport was hunted down and destroyed before leaving the system, though it would actually not be the last the New Republic would see of Isard. While not an officially sanctioned New Republic mission, the Bacta War and Battle of Thyferra specifically had some wide-ranging consequences. For one, it allowed the distribution of enough Bacta to help end the Krytos pandemic, along with some flaws in Krytos itself when spreading. Wedge and Rogue Squadron's resignations from the military had also been helpfully misfiled, meaning they were easily able to retake their official positions in the New Republic once again. The captured Lusankya and Virulence would go on to play important parts in the future of the galaxy as well. Virulence was renamed to Errant Venture and kept by Booster Tarek as a mobile smuggling den, which we covered in a recent video, while Lusankya was initially turned into a medical research lab, before eventually returning to military service in the New Republic as Wedge Antilles' flagship, and being sacrificed in the Yuuzhan Vong War nearly 20 years later to destroy a massive Yuuzhan Vong world ship. With Isard seemingly dead and the Bacta War ended, the hunt for Warlord Zsinj became the clear and uncontroversial priority for the New Republic, which will be the subject of our next video in this series, hopefully with a much shorter gap between episodes than between this one and the last. If you've enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more, and if there's a campaign you'd particularly like to see covered in this way, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.